Hello everyone. In this example, what we're going to be doing is taking a look at animating cameras and exploring our different background options. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so here we are in lecture 4 again. We just finished the compositing tag example, working with the Buick example, and really that's where you guys would be working out of with your cameras and all that stuff. So when it comes to animating cameras, I want you guys to be working out of this one, whereas I am going to be working out of here. Okay, so, as we left off, we have our logo animated. Okay, and now what we want to do is try and animate some cameras to add a little bit more to this, to really draw focus to what the viewer should be looking at or what we think is the most important aspects of this project. All right. And what we're going to be doing is taking a look at the 3 basic camera movements here. And I'm going to refer to them by their Cinema 4D name. So panning, zooming, and orbiting. Okay. So I am currently looking through, this camera here, right? Same thing. And we're going to use this as a starting place since it's already positioned very well for this particular project. Okay, so what we'll do is we're just going to duplicate this camera. So I'll hold control, drag down, and now I have this new camera. And I want to make sure it's in the same, example as the other camera. And we'll call this one underscore zoom. All right. And we'll look through that. Nothing should change at this point. We'll also go ahead and delete the protection tag so that we can animate this and play back that animation. Okay. Now, animating a camera is really just like animating any other object. We just want to keyframe whatever properties we want to animate. And usually that's position and rotation, but it could be other things like focal length or field of view. Okay. So what we typically do, especially for simple cameras, is choose a view we like, right? Like this is a good view for us to start. So I'll go to frame 0 and keyframe all my position properties, all my rotation properties. Okay. Go to another point in time, like, frame 120. And then move the camera to another position I like. And so I'm just zooming in while still trying to keep everything settled or centered here. And then once I'm happy with that next view, I will go in and keyframe all the position and rotation properties on that camera again. So now when I hit play, we get our zoom. All right. So animating a camera is as simple as that. Now, oftentimes camera moves are more complex, though for our projects, I really want us to focus on these types of simple camera movements, okay? The main focus of our projects should be the logo, its build up, all right, it coming together. And so too many cameras or cameras that are moving too fast are really going to take away from that. So with our zoom done, let's do a pan, okay? And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create another camera. And when I create this camera, it's going to be positioned exactly where my perspective view is. So even though I'm looking through another camera, my zoom camera, it's still going to be created at the exact same position. So I'm going to click on my camera button. And there it is. And look, I can switch between it and nothing happens. All right. So let's call this one 2 underscore pan. All right. Make sure that is in our example with all of our other cameras. And remember, for you guys, that will be up here. Okay. And now we want to have this camera pan. And there isn't that much we can really have our camera, pan and show. So I'm thinking we're going to do the text. And what's going to make this tricky is we're going to need the movement to start either right before or shortly after things come on screen. So what I'm going to do here is work with this section of my preview range where the text isn't animated, and then I will just move those frames earlier in time. Okay, so I'm currently looking through my pan. Once again, I'm going to choose where I want this camera to start, and so we'll just say that's the Buick text, maybe something like right here. Okay, and I'll make sure my time slider is at, I don't know, frame 130, and then we will keyframe the position and rotation of our pan camera. All right, so that looks pretty good. Let's go to, say, frame, I don't know, 200. Just slide it across, trying to keep it on the same Y value. And I can see that I didn't because it changed. Now, if I really was concerned about that, that is pretty easy to fix. But I'm not for the time being. Just kind of keeping it close is going to be good enough. So now that I moved that camera, keyframe my position and keyframe rotation. And if we scrub through this, here's our animation. The problem is we want this to happen as the text is building up. So I need to select both of these keyframes, and I can do this in my preview range down there, though I really am better off doing it in my animate layout and in my timeline. Now, I have a bunch of things in here. You may or may not have as many as I do. Not a big deal. What we're doing is looking for the pan camera. Okay, and we're not seeing any of its keyframes. So let's go ahead and hit frame all. Here they are. And when I select that camera, it selects both of those keyframes. And up top here, I can scale them down, scale them out. Or if I grab in the middle, I can just slide them. So let's shoot for maybe, I don't know, let's start at 45 for the first frame, and which means it'll end at 110, which is probably a bit late. Right? Notice how, the animation is really, for the most part, towards the edge of the screen, right? Like there's the eye, it's happening just off screen. Same with the C. So I'm going to move these a bit sooner so that this movement is a little bit more centered. Okay, and yours might look a little bit different. All right, maybe your linear field that we're using here is different in width or length, I guess. So really what we're just looking for is something like this, where as the camera moves across, the text is coming up, okay? And we can see a decent amount of that movement. So that's looking pretty good to me. All right. So that looks good. And that's our pan. So now what we're going to do is an orbit. Now I want you guys to watch me do this first because what we might think is an orbit is not really going to work. And I want to demonstrate that. I also went through and hid all of my cameras, just the top stoplight, so that way I don't see them in my perspective view. They can get pretty annoying and distracting. So once again, I'm looking through kind of my starter camera here. And once I've done that, we're going to create a third camera, and we will call this 3 orbit. And once again, I'm going to be just doing this, but so we can see it first. So with an orbit, you may think, all right, all I have to do is, choose a frame like this. And let's have this start a little bit earlier, maybe at frame 10. Select the camera, keyframe it. All right, go to frame, I don't know, 100. Go to the other side. All right, trying to frame it so we don't see outside of the background, but not the end of the world for this example. Maybe something like that. Keyframe that, and you may go, great, here's my orbit. Okay, and playing back, this might actually look pretty good. Okay, and it's not terrible. But really, this isn't a true orbit. And if we get out of this camera and take a look at its motion path, we will see that. So if I get out of this camera and I still have it selected, what we're going to see, this camera isn't orbiting, it's moving in a straight line, but it's also rotating as it does that. And so that's what's kind of giving us the illusion of an orbit. And so, as I said, this isn't necessarily a bad camera angle or animation, okay, but it's not a true orbit. We would need this line to arc or curve. So you may be thinking, all right, well, I just need to find the middle here, which, let's see, 90 frames, 45, so 55. Just come through, pull this back a little bit on the Z, keyframe everything again. We're getting a little bit of a curve now, starting to get that, kind of orbit. So this is going to be more of an orbit. All right, but we'll notice it looks a bit strange now. All right, the movement, it's not nearly as smooth because of that. All right. And while we could probably work with this more to refine it and get something that's good, we have another way we can create an orbit that's going to make our lives significantly easier. So this is what we're going to be doing together. So let's go ahead and get started with it. So I'll delete this orbit camera just so we're starting at the same spot. And what I want to do is, now that I'm in my perspective, I'm not in any of my cameras, I'm just going to zoom in and try and kind of, get something like this. Really not all that different than our original camera or our zoom camera, but we want to be looking as straight on as we can. And we'll have a chance to fix this here in a second. Okay, but once we are happy with this, we're going to create this camera again, call it 3 orbit again. All right, look through it, select it, and now I can see in my rotation that I did a pretty good job of, looking at this logo straight on, but we still have some rotation values here. So I'm going to center them out. And once I do that, you can see I was looking down at that quite a bit. So I can pan, try and get back to centered here. Something like this. Okay. And now what we're going to do that we have this centered is we want to create a null that's in the very middle of our logo. So I'm going to create a null object, and we can see it's pretty close. So I'm just going to kind of eyeball it here. And I really do want it centered with the Buick text as well. So not just kind of in the middle of the circle here, but kind of in the middle of both of these. Okay. I'm going to get out of my orbit camera just so I can see where this object is on the Z-axis and pull it just a little ways back. Once again, kind of splitting the difference between the Buick text and the Buick logo itself. Okay, so now that we have that null positioned, let's go ahead and drag it where our other cameras are. Let's put our orbit camera in there and look through it. Okay. And now if I want to make this camera orbit, all I have to do is on the null, animate the heading rotation. Okay. So that's all we're going to need to do now. So I can go to frame 0, maybe set my heading rotation on this null to negative, 8. All right, keyframe it, go to frame 100, set this to positive 8, keyframe it again. All right, I'm frame 99. Just slide that over a little bit. So now we have our true orbit. Okay, so that's how I recommend doing an orbit. It's by no means the only way. But once we have it set up, it's going to be the easiest. Okay, we don't have to worry about adjusting any handles or tangents to make sure our motion path is curved or arced enough or anything like that. Okay, so with that done, what we're going to do now is take a look at different background options. All right, I'll just switch to my original camera for this because we're just going to be kind of focusing on the logo. We really don't even need it animated. We did just go through and do all the compositing stuff for it, but we are going to be using it to talk about backgrounds. So really our two main background options are Cinema 4D and After Effects. Okay, pretty straightforward, nothing too crazy there. Okay, and really I would encourage you guys to do your background in After Effects, just to make sure we are still comfortable, animating, different elements, creating different elements, just working inside of After Effects in general. Okay, that being said, we do have some more options, especially when it comes to compositing, when we do our background in Cinema 4D. Okay, so we'll take a look at both of those, but let's go have a look. So the first background option is that I want to talk about is Cinema 4D. Okay, because technically that's the one we've already been working with, and that's where we have something in the background filling up the rest of our frame here. Okay, that is in our logo, and typically we do this with simple geometry, MoGraph animations using the random effector, that type of thing. Okay, and I have a couple examples to show you. All right, and so this can be really useful because we're kind of doing everything in one program, but it also gives us a little bit more flexibility with compositing because, as we'll see soon, it gives us the option to work with depth of field. Okay, which is a really handy effect we can add to our project. So this is one example of a 3D background. I have a couple of others in here which you guys don't have in your projects or your example files. So here's another one, right? This one has some movement as well. It's a little bit of an interesting take on the curved backdrop where it is itself animated and building up. And one thing we do want to be careful of with these animations, okay, one, intersecting geometry like we're having with the Buick stuff here, okay, but two, we want the movement to be slow and subtle. So that's why with the background that was there, it was using the random effector and the movement was really slow. It's why even in this background, the movement is a bit quicker, but it is very methodical. There's nothing really jumping out at you. It's pretty straightforward, and that's why I think it works too. Okay, so this is another example of a background, right, done in 3D that we could have in our projects. Okay, another example, which we'll actually see where this comes from very soon, all right, is something like this, where, once again, we just have some subtle movement. These things are just moving slowly back and forth here. Now, this background doesn't really work with this project. It's just one I had from another project, and I wanted to just show you guys, some different options or variations here, okay? But these are generally the types of backgrounds we do for our projects, okay? And just like we talked about with the camera animations, we want them to be slow and subtle because I do want movement regardless of which option you go with, Cinema 4D or After Effects. And we don't want that motion to be too distracting, as I just mentioned. So, all right, we've taken a look at a few Cinema 4D examples. How do we get our project out of here so that we can add a background in After Effects? And that's pretty easy to do. So I'm going to hide these other backgrounds, and that way I'm left with just my logo, okay? And you guys don't need to worry about doing this with me, okay? So the big thing here is to make sure we have empty space. So that means no geometry. The sky is not considered geometry, so it is not a problem if that is visible, okay? The big thing, though, is in our render settings, in the save group, we want to make sure the alpha channel option is checked on, okay? So that'll make sure all this empty space here is transparent when we pull our project, our renders into After Effects. So let me just go ahead and render out a still so we can see this really quick. Okay, so we'll just call this, I'm going to call this Buick background. And we also need to make sure we use a format that supports transparency. So that means no JPEGs. And it's one of the reasons why we use PNGs. So I guess I'll just switch that to physical. Let's see, everything else looks good. Current frame 1920. Awesome. So let's go ahead and render this out. And once this renders out, we'll go ahead and pull it into After Effects so we can see it, except there is no sky. So let me use the sky from a previous example and try that. Yes, I want to overwrite the black image that served no purpose for me. Okay. There's the sky, but nothing else. So I guess it would help if I set that to render. All right, one more time. Third time's the charm. All right, as you're seeing, rendering can be a bit tricky. Make sure you have everything set up correctly, the stoplight set up right. And so, you know, that you guys will figure that out with your daily renders, your project. That's really where the benefit of a render farm comes in to help speed up this process, okay? And avoid, you know, having to wait hours and hours only to find something, you know, is wrong, okay? So this is done. We can see our alpha channel here in our picture viewer. If we switch to the layer tab and then click on single pass, we see we have alpha, and we can see the logo and the text is white, meaning it will be visible, and everything else is dark. Okay, so let's go ahead and pop open After Effects so I can just kind of show you guys, you know, what this looks like, and, you know, I'll put together a couple of basic backgrounds. I don't know if I'll have a chance to actually animate them, but hopefully you guys will get the idea. Okay, so After Effects is started up. Let's go ahead and I'm gonna import this. Remember, you guys don't need to be doing this with me. All right, so let me find that still. There it is. All right, Buick. Great, bring it in. Drag it into a new composition, and you may be going, well, wait a second. Where is your transparency? And it's there, we're just not seeing it. So what we need to do is toggle on our transparency grid, and there we go. Right, so anything we put behind this now will now be visible. So I'll create a solid. All right, call this background. Make sure it's behind. And just to kind of get us doing something, I'll use like a soft gradient background here. All right, and obviously this doesn't work very well at all. I'm not sure any of these presets actually will. Okay, and I'm using a red giant thing, but this could be really anything. Okay, so that's much closer. So let's see if we can adjust the colors here and just desaturate these and darken them up a bit. All right, so maybe something like that. It's getting really... Okay. So this is actually looking pretty good. The problem is I'm not a huge fan of that dirt. So I wonder if that is the fractal noise we're seeing. All right, and nope, still seeing some other stuff there. Okay. Oh, probably under texture. Texture opacity, 0. Cool. So now this is too dark. So let's see if we can't just brighten this up just a touch. So trying to choose stuff that works well is desaturated. All right, so that's looking good. And you may be going, well, you know, if this is all you're doing, why wouldn't we just do this in Cinema 4D like we did with the gradient? And if this was all I was doing, you know, it's not the end of the world if I did this in Cinema 4D, but now I have this flexibility to where if somebody came to me who was giving me feedback, client, boss, you know, whoever, that they're like, all right, well, let's change the background colors, okay? If I'm doing this in Cinema 4D, that means re-rendering everything. Whereas if I'm doing it in After Effects, it's super easy and fast, okay? So here's kind of one example, and we could get some motion from this with the fractal noise. I can see it's definitely built in there, okay? As I mentioned, another option might be to use like shape layers. And so I could maybe come in here with my rectangle, come in here. I don't really want too much of a fill, no stroke, and just make a few rectangles. All right, so kind of do this, right? I may have to change the fill color after on some of these, but just really, just kind of recreating almost what I had in Cinema 4D with those cubes, except now I'm doing it with rectangles. I don't feel like, why I have to, I feel like I have to make each one a little bit taller, but something like this. And then you come through, change the fill on some of these. Okay, so it's a little bit darker, a little bit lighter. That's too much. All right, and I'm not going to do this for all of them because it can get pretty tedious just watching me change fills. And for all I know, there's probably a better way of doing this. Okay, but now I have some shapes here that I could work with, that I could animate. All right, place this behind my background, and now we're starting to slowly get somewhere. Now, I could absolutely mix both of these, right? So if I go back to that generator, I think this is kind of the one I wanted, I think, maybe. All right, so like Edge of Night looks pretty good. All right, maybe work with the blending mode and the opacity on this. All right, so that's looking pretty cool. And I could keep going. I'm not sure particle system makes sense for this, project, this brand, but that would be something to consider. Okay, regardless of what option you go with, Cinema 4D or After Effects, I want there to be some motion. Okay, so that is a look at how we can work with cameras as well as different backgrounds and how we can set that up for After Effects. As I said, I generally recommend you guys do After Effects just to make sure we stay comfortable with it and are spending some time in there. But ultimately, that decision is up to you. Okay, so that's all I got for you guys. Stay tuned for the next one.